and I actually bust my arm right up here. So I said, no hugs, only kisses while I'm here. But it's funny because, it made me start thinking back as a kid. I was, I don't know if I was kind of a spazzy kid, but I used to fall down the stairs all the time. I was always running. My mother used to say, like, don't run so much. Anyway, now I'm a 50-year-old kind of spazzy kid, I guess, is the way it works. But it's interesting because there have been kind of two reactions. Well, maybe three reactions. There's the people that are like, ow, which is true. And then there's the people that say, I knew I shouldn't exercise because it's dangerous. And then there's the other people that say, is the Lord trying to teach you something? And I really felt actually seriously to say this morning that if you have a theology that you think that God kind of hurts you to teach you something, it's the wrong theology. And I actually do really believe that God always brings something good. And he actually has shown me a few things, but I don't believe that he wounded me in order to do that. So that's just something I felt God say to, let's get rid of that theology and just look for his goodness, like what we were singing about this morning. Oh, that's great. That's great. I love to be prayed for, to be healed. I actually go for an x-ray on Tuesday, so I'm expecting to see it. Really, really nice. So that will be good. I'll be letting you know if it's completely healed. But what I want to speak about today is called core identity. And the idea of this teaching is, why do I act the way I act? Do you know sometimes when you're kind of in full motion of something and your head on the inside is saying, I should probably stop, but everything in you just keeps going with the way that you're acting or behaving? Anybody ever have that happen to them? Yes, I see a few hands back there. Well, that's what I want to talk about today. So, let me choose. Let's see, which color should I use? Got lots of assortment. I'm hoping most of you can see this board. I'm going to do a quick illustration. If you can pull the top off for me, that'd be great. In it, you'll be able to see I'm a wonderful artist. That's the first thing that you'll discover about me. This is a tree. In the Bible, God, just in case you couldn't quite tell what it was, in the Bible, God likes to use the analogy of a tree over and over again. He talks about, when we're planted by the river and our roots go deep. It's a great analogy. He talks about where there is fruit, there is root. Exactly. So we've got our fruit up here and we've got our root. What we typically try to do in church for years and years and years, and in fact, most churches are probably trying to still do it, is just chop off the fruit. So if there's any kind of problem like, lust or anger or, alcohol, drugs, that kind of thing, the list could go on. If there's anything like that, we just said, stop doing it. Okay. Now, I come from two parents who are very disciplined, but even if you're very disciplined, you still can only maintain that in your own strength for so long, and it's usually quite a short time. My favorite analogy to use is, let's say yesterday you decided, I'm going to start eating healthy. It's a May long weekend, it's spring, it's time to, get with the program, and I'm going to start eating healthy. No more sugar. And when you arrived here today, only to find out that it was a potluck. And somebody had just brought their freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. I mean the kind that when you bend them, the chocolate pulls from them. Not like a few chocolate chips in it, but loaded with chocolate chips. And you quickly remember, no, I'm going to eat healthy. But as soon as you have that thought, what does the thought do? It goes right to your mouth. Your mouth is already kind of like salivating, tasting those cookies, and the thought goes and goes until you say, you know what, one cookie's not going to hurt. I'm going to eat the cookie. Okay, so that's how well this kind of self-discipline works. It does not work at all. Then, what amazing people like the Sanfords. Have most of you heard about Elijah Howe, some form or fashion of that Sanfords? They started to really look at the root system. And when they looked at that system, they said the most important root that we have is our parents. And the idea of our parents is that we would have a mom and we would have a dad, and we would drink up all the godliness that they carried, and that would form us into a great tree. And together, we would be like a very strong forest of really solidly rooted and grounded trees, and our fruit up here would be good. Now, obviously, if we interviewed everybody, we'd find out our parents had some flaws, and it didn't quite work out perfectly. But that was the idea. Okay, a second root that we have is our generations. Okay, so if you come from, does anybody here come from 3 or more generations of Christians? 1, look at that. 2, 3, okay. Not many of us. You hear a guy like Bill Johnson. He has 5 generations on pastors on one side and 4 on the other. That's 9 generations of godly leaders who are in his family. No wonder he is, spouting out all this incredible revelation. So much of our generational line was meant to contribute to who we become, but a lot of us, including me, have a broken generational line. The next would be, I'm going to call them leaders in our life. So that could be your school teachers. Maybe you had a very godly school teacher. Maybe you grew up in church and had pastors or youth pastors, or we saw these kids workers going off at that tiny age, starting to impart into them. So they're part of it as well. Another root system is culture. Okay, now our culture we cannot ignore. I think most of the time we do. We just don't even think about it. But our culture has strengths and weaknesses. So if you think about being a Canadian, there's a couple different levels in Canada. But first of all, in Canada, our strength is one of our greatest strengths is that we're very welcoming. Would you all agree with that? We kind of open door. We're very welcome to diversity, and to, people can actually keep their own culture within the Canadian culture. And I love that about Canada. It's probably one of my favorite things. Gordon and I lived in Texas before we came to Canada. There was actually no openness to diversity. It was very, very divided, and it was beautiful to come back to Canada, actually. But it's also our greatest weakness. Right? We're so open to things that even though we might not agree with them, we just say yes to them. Okay? Can you think of some examples of that? I think about, probably the most obvious is same-sex marriage was something that if you ask most Canadians, do you agree with same-sex marriage? They would probably say no, but if you want to do it, okay. So we're too open to the things that are actually not godly, not going to produce godly fruit in our lives. Now, if you're a Canadian, like most of us are, that have roots elsewhere, so in other countries, you have to be aware of the strength and the weakness of that root system. So who would be somebody in here who had parents that were born in another country? Show me your hand. Yes. So look around. So you have to think about that country where your parents were born. What's the strength and what's the weakness? We always say you should say your own strength and weakness, because sometimes we get excited about other people's strengths and weaknesses and start pointing it out. But for example, if I'm feeling apathetic or just very, I would say use the word apathetic. I know it's involving my culture. Okay, not necessarily just me alone, but that culture that I grew up in that's like, well, whatever you want, it's very blah. Okay, so I have to look at that when I'm dealing with the root system. The last one would be our let's call them our friendships. Our friendships were meant to help grow us into this, which is the beauty of gathering together, right? When we have community that's godly and going after the same thing, it strengthens us who we are and become. Now this root system, we have to deal with this by forgiving and repenting. Okay? So anything that went on in your root system that was ungodly or painful, we have to deal with. We have to deal with our moms and dads, right? Anybody here not touched dealing with our moms and dads yet? We have to. I would say if we get good at forgiveness, it resolves 90% of what's going on in us. Forgiveness it's essential. We have to become masters of it. Okay, we cannot just let it sit in there and brew and bring life. We have to deal with this. So I'm sure you guys are constantly doing a lot of that, forgiving and repenting. So when this is dealt with, the good news is it solved the fruit problem for a couple of years. But what they found in ministry is that after a couple years, the fruit reappeared. That was discouraging. And what they realized that they had to deal with what's at the core. So if you remember your grade 6 science experiment where you took a little plant and you pulled off all the roots and took off all the leaves and you just had the stem and you stuck it in water in your windowsill in the sunshine, what happened? Yes, it grows back. Kind of wonderful when it's a plant, not so wonderful when you're the plant, okay? So that's the point. You have the life of the tree. Remember, the tree is us, is right here at the core, and we have to deal with that core, okay? What I want to do is I want you to get out your Bibles if you have them, or you can, if you've got them on your phone or you actually have a hard copy, and I want to read. We're just gonna read it quickly together. So Genesis 3, let's start in verse 6. So you know the story. So this is a story where Adam and Eve eat from the tree that they're not supposed to eat from. So verse 6 says, so Genesis 3, verse 6. So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and that they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves covering. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking into the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. Then the Lord called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked. I hid myself." And he said, "Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree from which I commanded you should not?" Then the man said, "The woman who you gave me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." And then the Lord said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Okay, so when Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, this is the first sin that is recorded in the Bible. What is the first reaction or feeling that they have? Shame. Okay, so I'm going to go so far as to say that shame is at the core of us. Okay, the definition of shame, if you want it or want to write it down, is that there is something fundamentally wrong with me. That's what shame says. Okay, this is the enemy's pleasure. You know, the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy. So when we live in this, there's something wrong with me.